I'm very, very happy. He's really sweet.
No conflicting careers or...
No, it's very easy because he travels a lot, and so I can work wherever he's working.
When it comes to rock legends, Mick Jagger is a figure that has shaped music history. But behind the electrifying performances and chart-topping hits, there was a rivalry that burned deep. While fans marveled at his performances on stage, backstage, there was a burning tension between Jagger and a co-star. At 81, Jagger now admits there was one person in his life he struggled with the most. Someone who challenged him in ways even he couldn't ignore. It's a story of clash and collaboration, and, as Jagger reveals, a relationship that was as volatile as it was legendary. Join us as we uncover the story of Mick Jagger, the iconic lead of the Rolling Stones, who has finally opened up about his strained relationship with a certain bandmate. The early days of Mick Jagger and road to rock stardom. Mick Jagger, one of rock's most iconic frontmen, was born into a regular middle-class family in Dartford, Kent, on July 26, 1943. His father, Basil Joe Jagger, worked as a physical education teacher and was even instrumental in making basketball popular in Britain. Jagger's mother, Eva Ensley Mary, had a lively spirit of her own. She was born in Sydney but was of English descent, working as a hairdresser while being politically active in the Conservative Party. From the start, Mick's family brought a mix of discipline, energy, and curiosity to his upbringing. Although Mick's father encouraged him to follow his path in physical education, Mick had other ideas. As he once shared, "I always sang as a child. I was one of those kids who just liked to sing." For Mick, music was always in the air. He joined the church choir and spent hours listening to singers on the BBC, Radio Luxembourg, and television. He wasn't just listening, he was observing, learning, and dreaming. In September 1950, a chance meeting happened that would change music history. Mick crossed paths with Keith Richards, who would eventually become his songwriting partner and fellow Rolling Stones member. They were both classmates at Wentworth Primary School in Dartford, but their friendship was short-lived at first. In 1954, the Jagger family moved to Wilmington, Kent, and the two boys lost touch when they went to separate schools. Mick continued his schooling at Dartford Grammar School, where he passed his exams, and today, the school even has a performing arts center named after him. The separation from Richards didn't stop Mick's musical journey. In the mid-1950s, Mick started a garage band with his friend Dick Taylor. Together, they played songs by blues legends like Muddy Waters and Chuck Berry. Mick's passion for rhythm and blues was unmistakable, and it was only getting stronger. Then, on October 17, 1961, fate stepped in again. Mick and Keith ran into each other at Dartford Railway Station, and this time, they didn't drift apart. Mick happened to be carrying some records by Chuck Berry and Muddy Waters, which immediately sparked a shared interest with Keith. This wasn't just a friendly reunion, it was the beginning of a powerful musical partnership. Soon they were meeting regularly, joined by Dick Taylor, Alan Etherington, and Bob Beckwith. This small group called themselves the Blues Boys and spent hours playing together, perfecting their sound. But on the other hand, Mick's academic life was also in full swing. He passed his O-levels and A-levels and even earned a government grant to study finance and accounting at the London School of Economics. For a moment, he thought about a different future, maybe a career in journalism or even politics. Reflecting on it, he compared politicians to pop stars, both fields requiring a certain charisma to captivate an audience. But his heart remained with music, and soon enough, it would become his path. Meanwhile, guitarist Brian Jones was making a name for himself at the Ealing Club, a place where London's blues scene thrived. Under the guidance of Alexis Corner, Blues Incorporated, a local blues ensemble, was attracting attention, and soon Jones, Richards, and Jagger joined the group. Mick became their lead singer, a role that suited him perfectly. Outside of the club, the trio continued meeting up to practice, setting the stage for what would eventually become one of the greatest rock bands in history, the Rolling Stones. The journey from Dartford schoolmates to future rock icons was unfolding, and Mick Jagger was right at the heart of it all. The legendary rise of the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones started as a group of young, gritty musicians who barely had a penny to their name. In the early 1960s, they were performing for free in a small basement club across from London's Ealing Broadway station, later known as Ferry's Club. They had so little equipment that they often borrowed gear from other musicians, like Alexis Corner, a central figure in the British blues scene. The band's first gig was in 1962 at the Marquee Club, under the name The Rolling Stones, a tribute to one of their favorite Muddy Waters songs. Soon after, they formalized their name to The Rolling Stones to add a touch of distinction, though their attitude remained anything but formal. At this time, the band lineup included Mick Jagger on vocals, Keith Richards on guitar, Brian Jones on multiple instruments, Ian Stewart on piano, Dick Taylor on bass, and Tony Chapman on drums. However, Keith Richards later recalled in his memoir Life that Mick Avery was actually their drummer that night, not Tony Chapman, adding a bit of mystery to their origins. By 1963, they had established themselves enough to land a 5-month residency at the Eel Pie Island Hotel. The BBC later credited this venue as a turning point for the band's career. In the fall of that year, Mick made a big decision. He left his studies at the London School of Economics to fully pursue music with the Stones. This decision would set him on the path to becoming one of rock's biggest stars. Building their sound, from covers to global hits. In the beginning, the Stones played covers of American rhythm and blues tracks by artists like Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley. It wasn't until manager Andrew Loog Oldham joined them in 1963 that Mick Jagger and Keith Richards began writing original songs. Oldham pushed them to find their own voice, which took time, but their partnership soon began producing major hits. One of their early compositions was As Tears Go By, which they wrote for young singer Marianne Faithfull, whom Oldham was also managing. In 1965, Jagger and Richards wrote The Last Time, their third #1 single in the UK. Inspired by the Staple Singers' 1955 recording of This May Be the Last Time, the song showed the Stones had a knack for combining raw emotion with catchy beats. But it was their next release, I Can't Get No Satisfaction, that launched them to international fame. This song defined the Stones' rebellious image, marking a clear contrast to the Beatles, who were seen as the charming, lovable mop-tops. Jagger later shared his thoughts on the song in a 1992 Vanity Fair interview. I wasn't trying to be rebellious in those days, I was just being me. Someone older might have thought it was just the most awful racket. He saw the music as fairly tame, but the public viewed it as edgy and groundbreaking. Their early albums, like Out of Our Heads and Aftermath, were huge commercial successes. The band's edgy sound and defiant attitude resonated with a generation eager to break away from the conservative norms of the time. Their music was bold, raw, and full of energy, which quickly made them the face of the British invasion. But as the band's fame grew, so did their problems. Troubles with the law. In 1967, a 3-part series titled Pop Stars and Drugs: Facts That Will Shock You was published by News of the World. The series portrayed the Rolling Stones as heavy drug users, kicking off a wave of legal trouble for the band. Although the initial article focused on other musicians, the second installment targeted the Stones, alleging that Mick Jagger was involved in drug use. However, it was later revealed that the reporter had actually confused Mick with Brian Jones, leading to a case of mistaken identity. This series of articles caused significant problems for the band, and soon after, both Mick and Keith were arrested on drug charges. Their sentences were unusually harsh for the time. Mick received 3 months in prison for possessing over-the-counter pep pills he had bought in Italy, while Keith was sentenced to a year for allegedly allowing cannabis use on his property. However, the backlash from the public was immediate. Even The Times, a traditionally conservative paper, criticized the severity of their sentences. The band appealed, and both sentences were eventually reduced, with Mick's changed to a conditional discharge. Although he only spent one night in London's Brixton prison, the legal battles continued for years, adding to their rebellious image and giving them a dangerous allure that only boosted their popularity. A changing lineup and a legacy cemented. By the end of the 1960s, the band was going through major changes. Brian Jones, one of the original members and a brilliant musician, was contributing less and less to their work due to his escalating drug issues. Mick later remarked that Jones was not psychologically suited to this way of life, and the strain on the band became evident. Unable to obtain a U.S. visa and facing mounting pressure, Jones left the band in June 1969, saying, "I've left, and if I want to, I can come back." Tragically, less than a month later, he was found dead in his swimming pool. Mick later reflected on this period, admitting he felt they had been too harsh with Jones, but also acknowledging that Jones had made himself a target with his jealousy and difficult behavior. Despite Jones's death, the Stones carried on, dedicating a concert at Hyde Park to his memory just days later. With Mick Taylor stepping in as guitarist, they played for an audience of 250,000, opening with Jagger reading from Percy Bysshe Shelley's poem Adonais and releasing thousands of butterflies as a tribute. The performance marked the beginning of a new chapter for the Stones, and they showcased new tracks like Midnight Rambler and Honky Tonk Women, which became fan favorites. However, 1969 had one more dark chapter for the band. In December, they performed at the Altamont Free Concert in California, where a young fan named Meredith Hunter was fatally stabbed by a member of the Hells Angels who were hired as security. The incident cast a shadow over the concert and has been seen as a symbol of the darker side of the 1960s counterculture. Jagger later recalled being scared shitless on stage, worried he might be attacked amid the chaos. Unstoppable legends and timeless hits. In 1969, just before his tragic death, Brian Jones left the Rolling Stones, and Mick Taylor stepped in as guitarist. This lineup shift brought the band new energy, and later that same year they were introduced on stage as the greatest rock and roll band in the world. That title would stick, defining their reputation and shaping their journey through rock history. The Stones quickly began producing one hit album after another. In 1971, they released Sticky Fingers, which featured legendary tracks like Brown Sugar and Wild Horses. This album also marked the first use of their now iconic tongue and lips logo, a symbol instantly recognizable worldwide. Their success continued with Exile on Main Sont in 1972, which featured fan favorites like Tumbling Dice and Happy. The band was unstoppable, and in 1973 they released Goat's Head Soup, featuring the hit ballad Angie. However, change came again in 1974 when Mick Taylor left the band and guitarist Ronnie Wood stepped in. With Wood's addition, the Stones' sound evolved, and their popularity only grew. Then, in 1978, the Stones released Some Girls, featuring the groovy Miss You and the soulful Beast of Burden. Then came Tattoo You in 1981, an album that gave us the unforgettable anthem Start Me Up. Each album added something unique to their music and marked new heights in their career. By 1989, Steel Wheels was widely celebrated as their comeback album, and they followed it up with Voodoo Lounge in 1994. With these albums, the Stones began a new era of massive stadium tours, drawing fans from across the globe. By 2007, they had broken records for the highest-grossing concert tour, not once but 3 times. Even in 2021, they remained the highest-earning live act, a feat few could have predicted when they started. After Bill Wyman left in 1993, the band continued as a 4-piece core, with Daryl Jones as their regular bassist. Following drummer Charlie Watts' passing in 2021, Steve Jordan joined as their drummer, and the band continued to play on. In October 2023, they released Hackneyed Diamonds, their first album of original material in 18 years, which quickly became their 14th #1 album in the UK. The Rolling Stones' estimated record sales, over 250 million, make them one of the best-selling music artists in history. They've won 3 Grammy Awards and even received a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. Their impact was recognized in 1989 when they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and again in 2004 with their induction into the UK Music Hall of Fame. Both Billboard and Rolling Stone have rightfully named them among the greatest artists of all time. But amidst all this, tensions were brewing beneath the surface, sparking a feud that would come to define the band's dynamic just as much as their music. Inside the 1980s feud between Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. From the outside, being in a famous band may look like nothing but fun and friendship. But ask bands like Oasis or The Kinks, and they'd tell you that being in a group doesn't mean you have to get along. Even in the Rolling Stones, tension existed between Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, the 2 legendary figures at the band's core. At the start, they played on a friendly image, seeming like 2 best friends who met as kids and bonded over music. And in a way, that's how it began. Jagger and Richards had known each other since childhood, living just streets away from each other in Dartford. When they crossed paths again on a train years later, they connected over a shared love for American blues, and soon after the seeds for the Rolling Stones were planted. Despite being a big part of the Rolling Stones, Jagger and Richards weren't the original leaders. That role fell to Brian Jones. But as the group's success grew, it was clear that Mick and Keith were the driving force, writing some of the band's biggest hits like Sticky Fingers and Let It Bleed. For a while, this partnership brought the group to unimaginable heights, and they rode the wave of success together through the 1970s. But by the 1980s, their relationship started to show cracks. The rise of MTV changed the music scene, and Jagger's evolving role and musical decisions didn't sit well with Richards. Their famous bond had shifted from best friends to an uneasy alliance. His Majesty, and the tension of the 1980s. The 1980s marked a challenging time for the Stones and especially for Jagger and Richards. The success that had glued them together was becoming a source of tension. Richards grew increasingly frustrated with Jagger's decisions, believing that he was putting his ego above the band. In Richards' eyes, Jagger had started acting like he owned the group. He even started calling him His Majesty as a dig at his behavior. In his memoir Life, Richards admitted that their relationship had been strained for years, but by the 1980s, it felt worse than ever. Jagger's desire to experiment and collaborate with other musicians, including David Bowie, only fueled Richards' irritation. The friction was so intense that Richards began to express his resentment through his music. On the band's 1980 album Emotional Rescue, Richards took the lead on the song All About You. It wasn't hard to guess who he was singing about. The lyrics hinted at a self-centered person with an inflated ego, someone who demanded all the attention. Although Richards was going through a separation from Anita Pallenberg, the digs at Jagger were clear. During this period, Richards took to calling Jagger Bitchy Brenda during rehearsals. Their dynamic was shifting from creative tension to outright hostility. Dirty work, and the sound of a broken partnership. The trouble came to a head with the 1986 album Dirty Work. This record became a symbol of the disconnect between Jagger and Richards. While they tried to adapt to the new sound of the 80s, the album didn't capture the classic energy of the Stones, and fans noticed. The tension was so strong that it was visible in the music itself. Bandmate Ronnie Wood later mentioned that having a few of his own songs on the record was proof that Mick and Keith were no longer functioning as a team. The chemistry that had once driven the Rolling Stones to greatness was breaking down, and their interactions in the recording studio had turned cold. When Richards did contribute his own songs to Dirty Work, it was clear he had something to say. On the track Had It With You, both Jagger and Richards seemed to be singing about each other. Jagger's lines took jabs at a dirty character, while Richards added his own digs, including a line about singing for your supper. This mutual resentment spilled into their performances and even made the headlines. Jagger and Richards' feud became as much a part of their image as their music, with the two constantly at odds. And yet, despite all the anger, neither could walk away. A Glimmer Twins reunion through music. Even as the feud raged, Jagger and Richards had an unbreakable connection, one that always seemed to pull them back together. Despite the digs, the frustration, and the occasional public insults, they still relied on each other in ways only longtime bandmates can. Jagger once described their relationship like that of brothers. Speaking to the Daily Mail, he explained, "If you work with someone that long, it makes a lot of bonds, a lot of memories, but it isn't a family." Richards, though a bit less sentimental, echoed a similar sentiment, noting that a band doesn't always get along, yet the music keeps them connected. Richards may not have always enjoyed Jagger's solo ventures, famously mislabeling Jagger's solo album Goddess in the Doorway as Dog Shit in the Doorway, but he respected the way their music bridged the gap between them. Richards even admitted that their true form of communication wasn't through talking but through playing together. He once reflected, "My main means of communication is through music. It's unspoken, but many of the barriers disappear once we start working." This mutual understanding kept them going, and was the key to holding the band together even when they felt like tearing each other apart. In the end, their journey together mirrored the blues music they both adored. The blues, which often reflects heartbreak and raw emotion, was the foundation of their sound and the anchor of their relationship. The bitterness in their songs told a story, but when they played together, all the resentment seemed to fall away. In 1989, the Rolling Stones came back together for a major tour, but Richards notes that the bond between him and Jagger was no longer the same. Although they could still perform on stage as the Glimmer Twins, the friendship they once had was gone. When Jagger accepted Knighthood, and Richards' strong reaction. While Jagger and Richards have had their share of differences, one disagreement particularly stands out: Jagger's knighthood. In 2003, Mick accepted the honor of being knighted by the British monarchy, something Keith wasn't too thrilled about. According to the Daily Mail, Keith threatened to pull out of an upcoming tour if Jagger went through with it. For Richards, knighthood didn't fit with the Stones' rebellious image. "I don't want to step out on stage with someone wearing a coronet and sporting the old ermine," he said, calling it a paltry honor. Keith's feelings ran deep, and he made it clear he'd never accept a title himself. "You have to kneel, and I'm not going to kneel for anyone," he said. Richards even suggested Jagger should have turned down the title, especially since Tony Blair, the Prime Minister at the time, allegedly pressured him into accepting. But Mick didn't see it the same way, and went on to be knighted, which was a defining moment that highlighted the differing views they had. Yet, despite this disagreement and all the rough patches over the years, the two have always found their way back to each other. Richards' loyalty and a lesson in respect. While Mick and Keith have had more than a few ups and downs, interestingly, Richards holds a lot of respect for Jagger's role in the band. Ahead of the 30th anniversary of his solo album Talk Is Cheap in 2019, Keith reflected on this in an interview with The Sun. He praised Jagger's dedication to fronting the band, saying, "I can praise Mick Jagger 99% of the time." Keith even said Jagger would probably say the same about him, showing that their mutual respect runs deep. Keith shared that working solo on Talk Is Cheap gave him new insight into the pressure Mick faces as the band's frontman. "I understood the pressure," he admitted. "My feelings towards Mick became, 'Yeah, I get it, man.'" He realized that being a frontman is not easy, and this understanding brought a new layer to their partnership. Yet the media often highlights only the conflicts, the odd bust-up between them, as Keith called it. Richards explained, "Things happen between Mick and me because it's just two guys working together. I love the man 99% of the time." Even with their rough patches, Keith sees what Mick brings to the Stones as something truly unique. Keith Richards and Mick Jagger, more brothers than friends. Keith Richards has recently opened up about his complex relationship with Mick Jagger, revealing that, despite working together for over 60 years, they're no longer friends. In his memoir, Life, Richards digs into the history they share and explains how the relationship has evolved. Though they are the closest of brothers, Richards admits there's too much wear and tear to consider them friends anymore. Richards talks about their unique bond, describing it as something that goes beyond friendship. "Mick and I may not be friends," he writes. "We're the closest of brothers, and that can't be severed." For him, the idea of being best friends doesn't capture the depth of what they've been through together. He compares their relationship to that of fighting siblings, explaining that even with all the tension, there's still a brotherly connection that time can't break. Richards also points to certain experiences that strained their bond. In 1977, Richards was arrested in Canada for heroin possession, a highly publicized event that could have ended his career. Jagger stepped up at the time, organizing the band's affairs and even offering emotional support. Richards recalls how Jagger took charge during the worst of it, like a brother, never complaining about the work or the pressures. Despite this early support, Richards believes that his drug issues and time in rehab ultimately led to deep resentment from Jagger, who grew frustrated with the loss of control in the band. By the early 1980s, their relationship was tense. While recording sessions were ongoing, the two barely spoke. They would record their parts separately, avoiding each other in the studio. The separation became even more pronounced when Jagger suggested to Rolling Stone magazine that the band might be done. Richards took this as a deep insult, feeling as though Jagger was willing to abandon everything they'd built together. This growing tension led Richards to pursue his own solo work, stepping out from the band's shadow. What Mick Jagger and Keith Richards are up to in 2024. Even at their age, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards are proving they're far from slowing down. The Rolling Stones launched their latest tour in April 2024, promoting their new album Hackney Diamonds, the band's first collection of original music since 2005. This tour spans 16 cities across North America, beginning in Houston, Texas, and including stops in New Orleans, Philadelphia, and Vancouver. Fans are getting a mix of the Stones' classic hits like Gimme Shelter and Start Me Up, alongside new songs from Hackney Diamonds such as Angry. Each night's setlist even includes a fan-voted song, giving every city a unique experience. Jagger still commands the stage with incredible energy, frequently engaging the crowd and strutting across the stage as if he were decades younger. To maintain his performance stamina, he credits a mix of regular gym workouts and a lifetime of physical discipline, drawing inspiration from his father, who was a physical education teacher. Meanwhile, Richards is as dedicated as ever, having recently enjoyed the tour's return to large, packed venues. His contributions continue to shape the Stones' musical direction, and he's hinted that there could be even more new music on the way. Hackney Diamonds brought notable collaborations, with artists like Paul McCartney and Lady Gaga making appearances on the album, and there's talk of some of these stars joining the band on stage during the tour. Richards has expressed appreciation for these collaborations and seems open to more creative projects in the future, fueling rumors of additional recordings beyond this tour. With Jagger and Richards still sharing the stage, fans are witnessing a partnership that's both legendary and at times complicated. Despite their well-known differences, the music continues to be the bridge between them. Given their long history and complex bond, what do you think keeps Mick and Keith together despite all the friction? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more fascinating stories.